The biting Kansas wind of late October 1878 clawed at Eliza Ramsey, a physical manifestation of the desolation that had claimed her heart since Thomas's passing. Each gust seemed to echo the emptiness he'd left, a void as vast as the plains stretching before the struggling wagon train. She gripped the rough sawn sideboard, her knuckles white beneath skin chapped raw by wind and work. Mr. Blackwood, her voice, though betraying a tremor she despised, held a core of resilience forged in recent grief. My husband Thomas paid for full rations. We are due more than this mockery. She gestured to the scant portion of wormy hardtack and the sliver of translucent jerky offered earlier. Silas Blackwood, the wagon master, a man whose narrow eyes missed nothing and offered nothing in return, let a stream of brown tobacco juice splatter dangerously close to the hem of her worn calico dress. The dress, her last good one, was already stained with the alkali dust of the trail and the tears she'd shed in the lonely nights. Your husband's dead, Mrs. Ramsey. Cholera takes what it wants. Contracts die with men. He paused, his gaze lingering with cold assessment on the pronounced swell of her belly beneath her shawl. You and that impediment are a drain on paying customers. A hot flush of anger momentarily burned away the chill in Eliza's soul. It is my child's due. Thomas provided for us. Her hand instinctively went to her abdomen, a protective gesture. The child, their child, was all she had left of him, a tiny, fierce flicker of hope in a world turned bleak. Blackwood's lips curled into a sneer that exposed yellowed teeth. Theft, is it now? Making demands? Accusing your betters of withholding? He didn't wait for an answer, his voice rising to carry to the nearby wagons, whose occupants pointedly looked away. He signaled two burly teamsters, men whose faces were studies in brutish indifference. Before Eliza could comprehend his intent, rough hands, smelling of sweat and oxen, seized her arms. Some folks just ain't meant for the frontier, madam. Too delicate. With a grunt and a coordinated violent shove, they thrust her from the slow-moving wagon. She landed with jarring force on the unforgiving earth, the breath knocked from her lungs. Her meager canvas-wrapped bundle of possessions, containing all that remained of her former life, arced through the frigid air, striking a half-buried rock and bursting open. Its pathetic contents, a spare shift, Thomas's small Bible, a tin cup, a few precious dried herbs her mother had insisted she pack, scattered across the rapidly whitening ground. The first stinging pellets of snow, harbingers of the unnervingly early blizzard, began to fall, sharp and cold against her exposed skin. Good riddance! Blackwood's voice, already receding, was laced with a cruel satisfaction. The prairie will claim its due. The mournful creak of the wagon wheels, the jingle of harness, the bawling of oxen, sounds that had been the rhythm of her life for agonizing months, faded, swallowed by the rising shriek of the wind. Alone. The word was an icy fist clenching around her heart. Snowflakes, now fat and heavy, clung to her eyelashes, melted on her hot cheeks like a fresh wave of tears. Her breath hitched in a ragged sob. Panic, cold and sharp as shattered glass, threatened to engulf her. But then, a distinct nudge from within, a determined flutter of life, a tiny foot pressing against her ribs. For Thomas, for our child, the thought was a lifeline. She scrambled to her feet, the wind tearing at her skirts, threatening to rip the thin shawl from her shoulders. The iron taste of fear was sharp and metallic in her mouth. Her overturned handcart, its single wheel bent at an impossible angle, lay a few yards away. Working with a desperate, clumsy haste, her fingers already stiffening in the rapidly dropping temperature, she wrestled the damaged cart onto its side. She dragged the ripped canvas of her bundle, now damp and heavy with snow, to form a crude, pitiful windbreak against the onslaught. She had to shield herself to preserve what little body heat she possessed. Every powerful gust seemed to steal more of her precious warmth, more of her dwindling hope. The small, carefully hoarded lard lamp, her one source of reliable light, lay shattered, the precious oil already a dark stain seeping into the thirsty earth. Her small sack of flour, painstakingly saved, was ripped, its contents scattered, already turning to a sodden paste in the driving snow. She clawed at the frozen ground with numb fingers, the nails breaking against stone and ice, trying to deepen a shallow depression behind the cart, to brace it more securely against the relentless, screaming wind. The echo of an axe? No, only the mournful howl of the blizzard, a vast elemental chorus that swallowed every other sound. The chill seeped into her bones, a relentless, consuming cold that promised a slow, agonizing surrender. Then a deeper, more intimate pain, a sharp, insistent clenching low in her belly. Too soon, far, far too soon. Terror, stark and primal, coursed through her. As she huddled, shivering violently, her body curling inwards to protect its precious burden, her hand, fumbling for purchase, brushed against something solid and familiar in her satchel, still miraculously slung across her body. Thomas's leather-bound surveyor's journal. A choked sob escaped her, instantly whipped away by the merciless wind. Its familiar outline beneath her numb fingers was a tangible link to him, to a life where she had been cherished, protected. The world dissolved into a painful, swirling vortex of white and gray. How long she lay there, a small, forgotten heap against the vast indifference of the plains, she couldn't know. The storm raged, a monstrous living entity intent on scouring the land clean. Her contractions, at first erratic and shallow, began to come harder now, closer, each one a fresh wave of agony. She was drifting, the cold a seductive numbness creeping up her limbs, promising an end to pain, an end to struggle. It would be so easy to close her eyes, to let the snow cover her like a soft, final blanket. But the tiny life within her fought on, a persistent, demanding presence. A shadow fell over her, momentarily blocking the sting of the driven snow. Dark eyes set deep within a weathered, copper-skinned face framed by straight, raven-black hair, peered down. A man, lean and tall, clad in well-worn buckskins and heavy furs that seemed to blend with the muted colors of the storm. Shawnee, her fading mind registered, a flicker of primal fear piercing through the fog of pain and encroaching delirium. His presence was so sudden, so silent, he might have materialized from the storm itself. He knelt beside her, his movements economical and strangely calming in their sureness. Kita, though she would not know his name for some time, took in the scene with a swift, assessing gaze. The inadequate shelter, the advanced pregnancy, the bloodless lips, the violent tremors that racked her small frame. His gaze, sharp and intelligent, fell on the small, beaded pouch still clutched tight in her frozen hand. A faint, distinctive scent of dried willow bark emanating from it, even in the frigid air. An old medicine. He grunted, a low sound in his chest that might have been acknowledgement, or perhaps understanding. His own people knew the willow's power against fever and pain. He'd heard distant shouts earlier, carried erratically on the wind. White men, careless and loud? They had not sounded like a search party, more like men confirming a task completed. Their passage disturbing the spirits of the place, pushing game further into the teeth of the storm. The white woman was near her time and perilously close to freezing. He worked with a swift, practiced efficiency, his heavy hunting knife a blur of motion as he cut into the deep, packed drift that had begun to form beside her makeshift folly. He hollowed out a deeper, more secure snow cave, angling the entrance away from the prevailing wind, a skill learned over countless winters. The rhythmic scrape of steel against compacted snow was a strange, almost soothing counterpoint to the storm's unholy fury. The cloying smell of wet wool from her sodden clothes mingled with the faint, clean scent of pine resin and smoked leather that clung to his own garments. He spoke then, a string of words in his own tongue, the meaning lost on her, but the tone was low, strangely comforting, not threatening. With surprising gentleness, given his rugged appearance, he eased her from her inadequate shelter into the deeper burrow he'd made. He stripped off his own outer buffalo robe, heavy and warm, and wrapped it around her shaking form. The immediate, brutal bite of the wind lessened, replaced by a cocoon of relative stillness. He offered water from a skin pouch, the liquid shockingly cold but welcome on her parched tongue. Then a strip of dried meat, which she could barely manage to chew, her jaw muscles stiff and uncooperative. Survival, for now, had a human face, though one whose expressions and intentions she couldn't yet read. A fragile, unspoken thread of existence had been spun between two disparate worlds, held taut and humming by the raging blizzard. His presence was a solid anchor in the swirling chaos. When he briefly stepped outside again, perhaps to reinforce the snow cave's entrance against the ever-drifting snow, or to listen to the storm's changing voice, Eliza's eyes fluttered open. A wave of intense pain, then a brief, merciful respite. Her stiff fingers, clumsy with cold, fumbled with the metal clasp of Thomas's journal. It fell open in her lap, the pages stiff with damp. Tucked inside, its delicate colors still remarkably vibrant against the browning page, was a pressed prairie rose, its petals like faded velvet. Thomas had picked it for her on their first wedding anniversary, back in Ohio, his shy, rare smile a cherished, sunlit memory in the gloom of her present. "For my prairie rose," he'd whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he seldom showed. The warmth of that moment, a tiny resilient ember in the vast, consuming cold of her despair, pulsed through her. Resolve fierce and profoundly maternal flooded back through her chilled veins. She would not die here. Her baby would not die here. Thomas's child would live. The night deepened into an abyss of wind and cold. The temporary shelter, though an improvement, was still brutally frigid. Eliza's labor intensified, each contraction a fresh, rending wave of agony that stole her breath and threatened to tear her apart. The child was coming, blizzard or no. The mournful, chilling howl of a wolf pack, closer now, a predatory chorus that seemed to mock her suffering, sent a fresh spear of primal terror through her. Kita, who had returned to sit silently by the entrance, a stoic sentinel, heard it too. His head tilted, listening intently, his expression unreadable in the faint light filtering through the snow-packed entrance. The wind shifted, a subtle but significant change in its voice, and began to drive fine, stinging particles of snow through the narrow opening, dusting their refuge with icy powder. He muttered something low in his own tongue, his brow furrowed with a concern that transcended language. Eliza gasped, fighting for breath, trying to communicate the urgency through the haze of escalating pain. "Clean, warm," she gestured feebly towards her belly, then, remembering her own mother's calm, practiced efficiency at countless village births, she mimed the actions of washing her hands. She fumbled beneath the heavy buffalo robe and tore a strip from the hem of her worn petticoat, a pitifully inadequate offering, but all she had. Kita watched her, his dark, observant eyes missing nothing. He understood. His gaze softened, a flicker of something akin to compassion in their depths. He knew of a place, a true shelter, not just a burrow in the snow. Making quick, decisive gestures now, he indicated they had to move. He pointed vaguely south, then mimed walking, carrying something. It was a gamble to move her in this condition, in this storm, but to stay was to invite death for both mother and child. Before they left, he noticed a raw, inflamed scrape on her hand, sustained when she'd fallen from the wagon, already red and angry-looking from the cold and dirt. He took a small, intricately beaded pouch from his belt, selected a few dried leaves, and chewed them briefly into a rough poultice. With surprising gentleness, he applied it to the wound. It stung fiercely for a moment, then a dull, spreading warmth began to soothe the throbbing. He worked with astonishing speed, fashioning a rough but sturdy travois from two long saplings he must have cached nearby for just such an emergency, lashing them together with strips of rawhide using his buffalo robe to create a bed. The journey was a descent into a frozen hell. Each lurch and bump of the travois sent jolts of white-hot agony through Eliza's tormented body. Kita moved with a steady, relentless pace, seeming to navigate by an instinct she couldn't begin to fathom in the blinding, disorienting whiteout. He made low, guttural calls at intervals, strange sounds that seemed to make the wolf howls recede slightly, as if he spoke a guttural language the storm and its wild creatures understood and, perhaps, respected. Finally, through a narrow, almost invisible cleft in a towering rock face, a place no one would find by chance, heavily veiled by a curtain of ancient, snow-laden cedars, he pulled her into a profound darkness. A cave. Protected, deeper, and discernibly, blessedly warmer than the open prairie. The silence within, after the storm's unending roar, was almost deafening. Here, by the sputtering, hesitant light of a small, carefully kindled fire, Kita coaxed to life with a bow drill and a handful of dry tinder he carried in a waterproof pouch, Eliza's daughter was born. A tiny, squalling miracle amidst the savagery of the storm, her first cries thin but insistent in the vast stillness of the ancient stone. Kita assisted with a stoic, quiet competence, his large, calloused hands surprisingly deft as he cleaned the infant and severed the cord with his sharp knife, then wrapped her in a piece of softer, well-tanned deer hide he produced from his pack. The shared ordeal, the raw, primal intensity of birth and survival in the face of overwhelming odds, forged a bond between them deeper and more profound than any words could express. Eliza, utterly exhausted but miraculously alive, held her daughter close, feeling the infant's fragile warmth against her own chilled skin. "Hope," she whispered, the name a prayer, a defiance, a promise. Kita watched them, mother and child, a flicker of something unreadable. Respect? Sorrow? In his dark eyes. He nodded once, a gesture of profound acknowledgement. Later, as Eliza drifted in and out of a healing, exhausted sleep, the infant, Hope, nestled beside her, a warm, breathing weight of pure love. She saw him by the low, smoky firelight. He was carving a small, smooth piece of dark soapstone he'd taken from his pouch, his knife moving with practiced skill. When he finished, he rose silently and placed the carving near the sleeping baby, a small, stylized animal, perhaps a bear or a turtle, its form simple but powerful. He touched the carving, then Hope's tiny forehead, and uttered a single soft Shawnee word, a blessing whispered into the stillness of the cave. The blizzard finally exhausted its fury after 3 relentless days, leaving behind a world transformed, sculpted in dazzling, treacherous white and profound, unnerving silence. The familiar landmarks Eliza had noted before the storm were gone, buried or altered beyond recognition. Game was scarce, the animals either having fled the storm's path or hunkered down deep in their winter dens. Kita returned from his hunts with little to show for his efforts. A single snowshoe hare one day, a brace of skinny ptarmigan another. His expression, usually so stoic, was often grim. He showed Eliza fresh tracks near the cave's entrance on several occasions. Shod horses, not the unshod ponies of the plains tribes. Too close for comfort. The unnatural quiet of the surrounding woods spoke volumes to him, a silence that meant other hunters, human ones, were in the area, disturbing the already stressed wildlife. Perhaps Blackwoods men making a cursory search, or worse, ensuring she truly was lost to the prairie. The last of her own meager flour was long gone, a distant memory. Kita's carefully rationed supplies of dried meat and pemmican were dwindling at an alarming rate. Hope, though small, had a healthy appetite and needed constant warmth, which in turn meant a constant, voracious need for scarce firewood. Each stick Kita gathered was precious. As Eliza slowly regained some of her strength, her focus, sharpened by a mother's fierce protective instinct, turned again to the only resource she had left, Thomas's journal. It was more than just a record of his surveying work. It was a window into his meticulous, observant mind. It wasn't just dry lists of plants and distances, bearings and elevations. His neat, precise script detailed subtle geological formations, variations in soil types, the specific species of trees and shrubs that indicated the presence of underground water. Cryptic, almost poetic phrases filled the margins. Where the 3 ancient cottonwoods drink from stone. Follow the raven's flight at sunrise from the split rock for 2 arrow flights. Water sings softly beneath the hollow-sounding ledge. She recalled Thomas's quiet, almost boyish fascination with dowsing, a skill he'd learned from an old, weather-beaten mountain man they'd encountered in Missouri. His steadfast belief that the earth held secrets and offered sustenance for those who knew how to listen, how to read its subtle language. Could these enigmatic notes mean more than just casual observations? Could they point to a reliable source of water, of life? She tried to explain her hopes, her burgeoning theory, to Kita. Spreading the journal open on the cave floor, its pages now softened and buckled from the damp, she pointed to Thomas's careful sketches, his spidery notes. She drew crude maps in the dirt floor of the cave with a charred stick, trying to match Thomas's drawn landmarks to the features of the landscape Kita had described or that she had glimpsed during their harrowing journey. She used the few English words Kita seemed to know, supplemented by expressive gestures and drawings. He listened intently, his dark gaze sharp and focused, missing no detail. When she pointed to a particularly detailed sketch of a distinctive, three-pronged rock outcrop Thomas had noted as unusual, Kita's finger, stained with wood smoke and animal blood, slowly traced a line from it on her dirt map. He spoke a few more Shawnee words than usual, then a hesitant cluster of English ones. Water. Good water. Hidden. He knew of such a place, or at least a legend of one, a story whispered by his grandmother in the long-ago days before his people were driven from these lands. The Singing Springs, she had called it, a sacred place cleverly concealed by the old ones, life-giving even in the driest summers or the harshest winters. His people had used it long ago for healing, for ceremony. It was a place of power and of sustenance. The idea, fragile at first, took firm root in Eliza's mind. A hidden spring. It meant fresh water, untainted by the alkali that plagued so many prairie streams. It might mean game drawn to its banks, a more sheltered, defensible location than their current exposed cave. But it also meant leaving the relative safety of their present refuge, exposing themselves and the vulnerable baby to the unknown dangers of the winter landscape, and potentially to Silas Blackwood or his men. Yet to stay meant to slowly starve, to watch hope weaken, to succumb to the relentless attrition of the prairie winter. Supply countdown. Kita now counted his lead shot for his ancient but reliable rifle with grim precision. The baby's cries, though still strong, had taken on a thinner, more fretful edge that tore at Eliza's heart. They had to risk it. He looked at her, then at the sleeping child, and nodded once, a silent agreement. They would go as soon as she was strong enough to travel. Later that evening, as Eliza repacked their few essential belongings into a more manageable bundle, a folded, slightly yellowed sheet of paper fell from the back pocket of Thomas's journal. She unfolded it carefully. It was a half-finished letter written in Thomas's familiar, steady handwriting, addressed to his younger brother back east, in Ohio. Her vision blurred as she read the faded ink. Cannot shake this deep unease about Blackwood. He is a hard man, which is to be expected on such a venture, but there is a covetous gleam in his eye when he surveys the land, a hunger that is not just for a route west. I have come to believe he seeks something of particular value beneath the soil itself, and I have begun to worry he means to cheat us, and others, of our chosen plot selections when the time for filing claims arrives. He bears watching, and I find I do not trust him with our future. The word sent a fresh chill down Eliza's spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the lingering cold of the cave. Blackwood was not just a callous bully, he was a calculating, greedy man, and Thomas had known it. The decision to seek the Singing Springs, spurred by Thomas's cryptic notes and Kita's ancestral memory, hung heavy with risk. Each sunrise painted the snow-covered prairie in hues of rose and violet, a breathtaking beauty that belied the harsh realities of their existence. Hope, bundled tightly in furs, was a small, warm weight against Eliza's chest as they traveled. Kita breaking trail ahead, his lean form a dark silhouette against the blinding white. Eliza, still weak but driven by a desperate resolve, leaned heavily on a sturdy branch Kita had fashioned into a walking staff. Thomas's journal, now their most precious map, was tucked securely inside her bodice. They moved slowly, cautiously, Kita's senses alive to every shift in the wind, every distant bird call, every almost invisible track in the snow. One chill afternoon, as they scouted a promising ravine marked by 3 ancient, gnarled cottonwoods just as Thomas had described. Where the 3 ancient cottonwoods drink from stone! Kita froze. He pointed to the ground. Fresh tracks. Not the splayed prints of deer or the delicate tracings of coyotes, but the distinct, sharp crescents of shod horses. Several of them. And nearby, almost hidden by a drift, a newly driven wooden stake with a strip of red flannel tied to its top. A claim marker. Silas Blackwood's shadow fell cold upon them. From a concealed overlook fringed with brittle, frost-covered willows, they saw him. Blackwood, flanked by 2 of his thuggish cohorts, was roughly interrogating a small, frightened settler family, a man, his wife, and 2 young children, huddled beside a meager, smoking fire. Their wagon looked broken, their faces etched with despair. Blackwood's voice, harsh and bullying, carried on the still air. "Seen any other water? Any creeks not marked on them government maps?" The settler shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. Blackwood backhanded him across the face. The woman cried out. Eliza's blood ran cold. This was the man Thomas had warned her about, his greed a palpable force. Kita's hand on her arm was a silent command to remain hidden. The environmental cues were stark. The disturbed wildlife they hadn't seen, the unnatural stillness that often preceded human intrusion. Now the human interference was blatant, brutal. This was the land Thomas had envisioned for their future, the land Silas now sought to control through intimidation and theft. The last of their own dried meat was gone. Kita had only managed to snare 2 rabbits in as many days. The tension architecture of their survival tightened another notch. Later, when Blackwood's party had moved on, leaving the settler family shaken, but, for now, unharmed, Eliza pulled out Thomas's journal and his compass. Her fingers, clumsy with cold, traced his notes. From the 3 cottonwoods bearing north by northwest, approximately 200 paces, look for the Raven's Perch Rock. Using the compass, her heart pounding, she sighted the bearing. Kita watched, his expression unreadable but attentive. She paced off the distance, her steps uneven in the deep snow. There, a distinctive outcrop of weathered sandstone, shaped vaguely like a perched bird, just as Thomas had sketched. It was almost uncanny, his observations guiding her still. She had found his landmark, but where was the spring? Kita, meanwhile, had circled the area, his movements fluid and silent as a shadow. He returned, his eyes narrowed. He pointed to subtle signs she would never have noticed. A faint discoloration in the snowmelt near a protected crevice. A patch of unusually vibrant moss clinging to the leeward side of a rockfall, the almost imperceptible sound of trickling water if one listened with extreme care. He knew this place, or places like it. He showed her how his ancestors might have used specific types of charcoal and river stones, layered carefully to purify small, hidden seeps. This was his people's knowledge, a forgotten skill to her world. Following these subtle clues, Eliza, her earlier understanding of Thomas's dowsing notes now clicking into place, used her staff to probe a deep drift banked against what seemed a solid wall of rock, obscured by an ancient rockfall. The staff suddenly met less resistance, then pushed through into a small void. Together, they dug away the snow and loose stones. A narrow opening appeared, dark and smelling of damp earth, and something indefinably fresh. The faint, unmistakable murmur of moving water emanated from within. The singing springs. It was real. They squeezed through. The passage opened into a small grotto, a hidden sanctuary. Water, clear and cold, welled up from a fissure in the rock, pooling into a series of small basins before disappearing into the earth again. Ferns, miraculously green even in this deep winter, clung to the damp walls. It was more than just a spring. It was a significant, life-giving source, enough to sustain a small settlement or a band of migrating animals. And it was cleverly, almost invisibly concealed. No wonder Blackwood was so desperate to find such a resource. To control this water was to control the surrounding lands. They had found it, but the discovery felt more perilous than triumphant. As Kita examined the grotto, running a reverent hand over the damp stone, he stopped. His fingers traced a series of faint, almost eroded carvings near the spring's source ancient symbols. A spiral, a series of interconnected lines, a stylized animal. Eliza watched his face transform. Recognition. Awe. He turned to her, his voice hushed with an emotion she had not heard from him before. He spoke in Shawnee, rapidly, then struggled for English words. My people. Long ago, this holy place. He pointed to a specific, intricate symbol, a circle with 3 radiating lines. Eliza's breath caught. She fumbled for Thomas's journal, her fingers shaking as she flipped through the pages. There, beside his notes for the spring's coordinates, Thomas had meticulously sketched that exact same peculiar symbol, labeling it merely unusual geological marker. The convergence was staggering. Thomas, in his scientific curiosity, hadn't just found a spring, he'd unknowingly rediscovered a site sacred to Kita's ancestors, a place of spiritual importance, a reliable life source before their forced displacement. Silas Blackwood wasn't just stealing land for its resources. He was on the verge of desecrating a holy site for profit. The stakes, already impossibly high, had just been elevated beyond personal survival to cultural preservation, to a fight for justice. This was the vital, unrecorded resource Kita's people had cherished, and that Blackwood would exploit without a second thought. Kita then reached into the small medicine bag he always wore around his neck. He withdrew a worn, folded piece of treated hide, so old it was almost translucent in places. He carefully unfolded it. On its surface were markings, faded and cryptic. Not a map in the way Eliza understood it, but more a mnemonic device, a story in symbols showing significant tribal sites, migration routes, sacred places. He pointed to one symbol on the hide, the circle with 3 radiating lines, and then to Thomas's identical sketch in the journal. The connection was undeniable, a bridge across cultures, across time, forged by shared peril and a dawning mutual understanding. Their individual hidden resources, Eliza's husband's journal and Kita's ancestral legacy, had intertwined. The knowledge of the spring's sacredness, coupled with Thomas's letter exposing Blackwood's avarice, solidified their resolve. They could not let Silas Blackwood claim this place. Kita knew the man would destroy the fragile ecosystem, defile the sacred carvings, and exploit the water until it ran dry, all for his own enrichment. The spring wasn't just for them, it was a legacy. They found the intimidated settler family, the Millers, still camped by their broken wagon, their spirits lower than the winter sun. Eliza, with Kita standing silently but powerfully beside her, his presence a testament to their shared purpose, laid out the situation. She showed them Thomas's journal, explaining his meticulous mapping of the spring, his notes predating any claim Blackwood could feign. "This is our water, everyone's water," she said, her voice clear and strong despite the tremor of fear. "Blackwood means to steal it, to control us all." Kita then spoke, his English still halting but imbued with a quiet dignity that transcended language barriers. He spoke of the singing springs not just as water, but as a gift from the Creator, a place of life and spirit for his people, a place that had offered sustenance long before any white man had set foot on these plains. He spoke of sharing, not owning. Eliza, understanding more of his Shawnee now, helped translate the nuances, bridging the gap between his ancestral reverence and the settler's pragmatic need. Some of the other scattered independent homesteaders, drawn by the news or by Kita's quiet summons, had gathered, their faces a mixture of hope and suspicion. The cultural barrier was still present, a chasm of experience and mistrust. But Blackwood's blatant greed was a more immediate, tangible threat. The environmental imperative was clear. In this harsh, often unforgiving land, a reliable Sweetwater spring like Singing Springs was life itself. Its value was beyond measure. The confrontation came 2 days later. Blackwood, with a larger group of hired men, rode up to the grotto's concealed entrance, which Kita had subtly marked. He clearly intended to stake his formal claim. He found Eliza, Kita, the Millers, and a dozen other determined settlers waiting for him, silently arrayed before the narrow opening. "Well now, Mrs. Ramsey," Blackwood sneered, his eyes glittering with malice. "Playing squaw man, are we? This here spring is on land I'm claiming for the new township. My discovery." Eliza stepped forward, Thomas's journal held out. "This spring was mapped by my husband months ago, Mr. Blackwood, before you ever set eyes on this valley, and it is a sacred site to the Shawnee." Blackwood laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Indian superstitions and a dead man's scribblings? That won't hold up." He turned to the settlers. "Don't be fools. Side with me, and there'll be water shares for all, who are loyal." His gaze fell on Eliza, a sly, insinuating look. Perhaps even a special arrangement for a pretty widow, once she sees sense. Eliza felt a surge of revulsion, but also a cold, clear anger. This was her cultural threshold decision. To compromise now, to accept Blackwood's tainted offer, would be to betray Thomas's memory, Kita's trust, and the sanctity of the springs. "This water belongs to no single man, Mr. Blackwood," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "It is a gift of the land for all who respect it. We propose a council where settlers and any native people who hold this place sacred can agree on its fair and respectful use. We will not allow you to monopolize it or defile it." Enraged, Blackwood snarled, "Enough of this! Men, clear these squatters out. This spring is mine." His hired men, a motley collection of hard cases, moved forward, hands on their pistols. The settlers tensed, some raising their own hunting rifles, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Keita stood motionless, a figure of stone, his eyes fixed on Blackwood. The air crackled with imminent violence. Then a voice from Blackwood's own ranks. "No, sir, I won't do it." One of the younger men, his face pale but resolute, lowered his rifle. "My family's thirsty too. What she says, it makes sense. Sharing it." Another man hesitated, then slowly lowered his weapon. Blackwood's authority, built on fear and greed, was crumbling. He stared, aghast, as his force began to dissolve. Seeing his advantage lost, his face contorted with fury, Silas Blackwood spat a curse, wheeled his horse, and galloped away, his few remaining loyal thugs trailing behind him, vowing revenge that now sounded hollow. The immediate human threat had been faced, the cultural divide partially bridged by a common need and a stand for principle. Years passed. The settlement that grew around Singing Springs was named Hope's Spring, a testament to a child born in a blizzard and the enduring power of her namesake. It was a small community, but it thrived. Its roots sunk deep into the prairie soil, drawing life from the protected waters. The blended survival techniques were visible everywhere. Settler farming methods, crop rotation, careful irrigation drawn from the spring, were enhanced by Shawnee wisdom regarding land management, conservation, and the sustainable harvesting of wild plants, knowledge shared by Keita and patiently taught to his new neighbors. Hope herself, a young woman now, moved easily between two worlds. Her tongue fluent in her mother's English, and the Shawnee dialect Keita had taught her, a natural bridge for new generations, her laughter echoing the melody of the spring itself. Thomas's journal and Keita's grandfather's fragile hide map lay side by side in a simple glass case in the community's small meeting house. Revered artifacts, symbols of their improbable founding, a constant reminder of the convergence of two paths. Shawnee craft traditions, introduced by Keita and embraced by some of the settlers, were visible in the intricate beadwork on a cradleboard, the geometric patterns woven into a rug, the smooth, polished surface of a carved wooden bowl, existing in harmony alongside settler quilts and sturdy, functional furniture. Each autumn, the community celebrated the Feast of the Singing Spring, a harvest festival that blended settler Thanksgiving traditions with Shawnee, expressions of profound gratitude for the land, the water, and the spirits that Keita taught them dwelled there. The community, through a formal pact, held the spring and its surrounding groves as common land, protected from overdevelopment or exploitation. Keita, his authority unquestioned, his wisdom respected, served as a quiet warden of the land, his knowledge of its rhythms and needs unparalleled. Eliza, her hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with the wisdom of years and the memory of hardship, often sat with the children by the gurgling water, telling the story of their community's beginnings. Of a terrible storm, of survival against all odds, of the courage found in an unexpected alliance, and of the enduring importance of respecting boundaries both of land and culture. The challenges of the wider frontier, the ever-present pressures on indigenous peoples and their lands, were not forgotten, existing as a somber counterpoint to their small island of coexistence, but here, in Hope Spring, something precious had been forged and was fiercely protected. Eliza and Keita, their lives interwoven by shared experience and a love that needed few words, were the heart of this unique community. Their own children, Hope and her younger brother, Thomas Keita, embodied the blended heritage of their parentage. The legacy epilogue of their struggle was written not in grand pronouncements, but in the quiet rhythms of daily life, in the preserved cultural artifacts and in the ongoing stewardship of the land that had first brought them together. One late summer evening, as the sun dipped below the vast horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, Eliza and Keita sat on a smooth, sun-warmed rock overlooking the singing springs. The sound of their grandchildren's laughter drifted up from the shallow pools where they played, their small figures darting among the ancient cottonwoods. A profound peace settled over them, a testament to their resilience, their enduring love, and the lasting legacy they had painstakingly built against all odds, a legacy as vital and life-giving as the spring itself.